So now we are going to be working between two documents. This document that you should have downloaded and the documents that we just created. That is the pages for your structured notes, at least some of which for which you will receive a grade. You will also receive a grade for doing what I do on this sheet of paper. So if I write something down, if I make a marking of any kind, then you must do so as well. Now, since creating this document, I realized that I would like a different title. This says more rules and concepts you must apply in the future argument analysis assignments. But the rules and the concepts the additional rules and concepts that I that I present to you that go along with what you learned in the soft talk module on argument are actually here in handwriting on pages 1 through 5 of this document. So what I'd like for you to do is to cross out this part. So they just have argument analysis, interactive practice, okay? And at the top, I would like for you to write this as a reminder. See handwritten notes on argument, you can abbreviate analysis for rules and concepts applied below. Again, pause the video if need be. And then here, we're going to have to put it in a very small space. We're going to also add something. Here, I want you to write C, argument, analysis, practice, document for examples. So you need to write that down. You're going to need this throughout the semester, and you might forget, if you're looking at this, that you have a lot of examples to look at. Or if you just see this, you might forget that the rules and concepts that were applied are actually available in another document, which is why I'm asking you or directing you to go ahead and write or add these things here. All right, so like I said, we're going to be working between these two documents, and we're going to start with this first page of this document, and this video is going to focus only on this argument to keep it short, or as short as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to role model what it looks like to apply what you learned in the soft talk module. So I'm going to pretend to be a student. But I'm also going to role model to you some markups that I would like for you to use in applying what you learned in the soft talk module. So first, I'm just going to do it, and then we're going to take notes. So don't take any notes until I tell you to. Just listen and follow. And again, I want you to think of me as role modeling for you what you should, your thinking process, your self-talk process for applying what you learned in the soft talk module and noting what new things, what I'm doing with the arguments to show visually what I'm applying. So just follow, no stress, no pressure. Okay, so here we have argument 1. It says, okay, so Dr. Grillo wants me to analyze this argument. Before I analyze it, I need to remember what is the definition for argument. I don't remember it. Let me go look at my notes or the lesson. Oh yeah, the official definition for argument in my notes says that an argument is a set of statements where at least one, a premise, is given in support of a conclusion. Okay. By the way, students, if you don't have that written down anywhere, you might want to write it down somewhere that you know that you will look constantly. So you might want to start your own notes and write down the official definition for argument analysis. You could also put that information at the top of page 5 as a kind of reminder, right? Argument and then rewind this video and write down that definition, but again, do it very small at the top of your notes. All right, so it says at least one statement functions as a premise, which means there's at least one, there could be more than one reason, in other words, and there should be one that the other statements, the premises or reasons, are supporting. Okay, so that said, I need to look for at least one premise and a conclusion. So I have come to the conclusion that I am wearing a mask of my own free will. My reason for thinking this is true is that free will refers to any action, choice, or decision voluntarily made. My wearing a mask is something I voluntarily choose to do. Well, maybe Dr. Krill is giving me an easy one, but it looks like they're saying, here's my conclusion. And as I use my college level reading comprehension skills, I also see that they're saying my reason for, and I know that a reason is a synonym for premise. By the way, so time out. I'm going to break into my coach mode. You might want to put, if I say you might want to put, you don't have to, but I think you should. In fact, well, yes, we're going to. So here, if I were you, I would write that definition for argument I gave you, okay? So what was the official definition I gave you during the self-talk module? I gave that to you in this video. And then you need to remember that the word premise is equal to, means the same thing as what? Reason. All right. So here they're saying my reason for thinking this is true. In other words, here comes my premise, okay? And over here, they use the word conclusion, so they're giving me a reason for this statement, the conclusion. All right, so let me go ahead and make sure that I haven't missed any statements. Oh, there's another statement here, but what is it? It could be a reason. She hasn't told us that we have arguments with two, well, she has actually told us we have an argument with two conclusions. Maybe this is one of them. Okay, so something I need to tell you guys is that for right now, we are working only with arguments that have one conclusion. So at the top of this page, let's say in a box, examples on in this document have only one conclusion. Okay, they're what we call simple arguments. We'll get a more formal introduction to that later, but in the near future. Okay, so, all right, so I was in student mode thinking through this, and I want you to think about how I was recalling the definition and trying to recall prior knowledge and learning from either the module or some other lesson. So one thing, now I'm speaking to you as a professor and coach, one thing that you're going to have to do to visually represent your application of what you learned in the argument module is mark up the passage. So one thing you're going to do is bracket and number each and every statement within an argument. So here it says, I have come to the conclusion that. So I prefer not to bracket my conclusion indicators. So you learned about that in the argument module. I'm not going to go in depth about that. So the core statement begins with, I am wearing a mask of my own free will. Okay, that's just telling us a conclusion is coming. So what we're bracketing is just the core statement. Then you're also going to number the statement. Make sure that your number is above the statement being bracketed and at the very beginning of the statement being bracketed. We're going to add this to our notes. Don't worry about it for right now. Okay, then we've got my reasons for thinking this is true is that free will refers to any action, choice, or decision voluntarily made. Okay, so they have my reason for thinking this is true. So there's a premise indicator here, a premise indicator phrase, my reasons for thinking, that is the premise indicator. Actually, right here, this is true is a tiny little statement. It's hard to see, so be very careful. If you want to add this to your warning notes, you can say some brackets could be as small, some statements could be as short as 3 words. So be very careful when analyzing something. So that's going to be statement 2. Okay, oh, and actually, yeah, it's true. So this is weird. We're not going to do anything with is that, okay? We're going to skip that. We wouldn't want to say, is that free will? That would create a sentence fragment. So the statement is really here. That would be statement what? 3. So you're going to do the number with this and draw a circle around it. We do this so that it's more efficient for us to visually make sense of the markup. It allows me to more efficiently and more accurately grade what you have. So the number should be in a circle. So free will refers to any action, choice, or decision voluntarily made. Okay. And then we have another statement right here, statement 4. By the way, I recommend using a pencil because I might make a mistake on purpose or not on purpose, and you will need to make the correction. Okay. So then make sure we do the closing bracket. All right, so let's go ahead and write this in our notes. By the way, this is probably going to be the longest video because this is going to be the one where we take most of the notes that we need to apply and learn to apply. The rest of the videos will just be applying what we write down in this video. All right, so marking up statements. So as you know, we must bracket and number each statement. Okay. Notice that I say bracket and number statements. When we're working within the passage, we are not bracketing and numbering premises or conclusions as such. We're not saying this is premise 1 or premise 2. We're just looking at statements right now. We're not even labeling what's a premise or a conclusion. Some students, about 10%, end up numbering the premises in a paragraph, and that's not what you're numbering. You're numbering statements. Okay, bracket and number each statement. Okay, let's do a sub-bullet. The number should be at the top of a statement and at the statement's very beginning. Okay. Sometimes I don't see that students have numbered a statement because they put the number below it or they put it in the middle at the end. And so I don't see it. But I also am very strict about making sure you mark up your arguments exactly as outlined in the notes. So you wouldn't get credit for that if you put the number at the middle or the end of a statement or if you put it below. Okay. All right. So do not bracket and number anything that is not a statement. Okay, so should I ask for page 1 of your notes? I should see all of this information here. All right, so here we've already done that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look for the premise and the conclusion, which we'd already started to do using the knowledge that I've gained from the argument module on what an argument is, the definition for argument, knowledge of indicators. I'm going to go ahead and infer that this is the conclusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a C to mean conclusion, and we're going to put it to the right of the number that we have used to indicate the statement identified. We also said that 3 is a premise. Now you might be saying, hey, what about statement 2? Statement 2 is basically saying this is true. So what do they mean by this is true? They're referring back to what? Statement 1. So I don't really have any room, which is my fault. I wasn't thinking ahead. But statement 2, since we don't have any room, we're going to put conclusion repeated, right? So if you absolutely don't have any room, even if you write small, you could do something like this. But since you're typically only using one letter, to label a statement, this should be very rare. Maybe when you have to say repeated. Okay, so this is the conclusion repeated. It's not a new conclusion. We're not labeling this as anything. It's more like a transitional phrase going from the repeated conclusion to the premise. The reason that they give it in support of statement 1 is given in statement 3. And then statement 4 is also functioning as a premise. So we write the P, the label, next to the statement number. All right, so that brings us to a new rule. Okay, so here we have this thing about bracketing and numbering statements. Okay, labeling statements. Okay. All right, so notice we're still focusing on statements. What do we do with statements? Okay, so now it's not about bracketing and numbering, it's about labeling the statements. So use a C to indicate a conclusion in a, please write this down, you'll understand better why next time, a simple argument. Okay. Use C repeated when said conclusion is repeated, even if it's more precise or it's more fuzzy. So in our example, the repeated conclusion is stated in a very general, fuzzy way. You don't even really know what it's about unless you've read statement 1. Okay. So then use P, and we're going to use capital, I should say capital letters. Use capital P to indicate premises. And remember, premises is synonymous with reasons, but we're going to use P to label the statements that are functioning as reasons, premises. So I shouldn't see an R, just premises. All right, so now when it comes to both of these, when it comes to all of these, okay, these labels should be to the right of a statement. What do you think I'm going to say? Number. All right. All right, so there's one last thing, and like I said, this video is going to be the longest because this is where we take most of our notes. After this video, it's mostly a matter of applying what's in our notes. All right, so now that we've applied this, and I'm pretty sure you can see that I'm applying what you learned about in terms of facts from the argument module, showing you how to apply it, and we're adding new rules and concepts to apply. So this visually shows me that you've applied what you learned in the argument module. It visually shows me that you're analyzing this. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create an argument pattern and an argument diagram. Throughout the semester, you can earn bonus points, extra credit for doing argument diagrams and argument patterns. So even though it's extra credit, I still want you to write down what I write down with respect to argument pattern and argument diagrams. Do not write anything at all in the space that is here, because we need this space to apply other stuff that we learn in another SoftTalk module. Okay, so let's focus on the argument diagram. Whenever you do an argument diagram or pattern for extra credit, you're always going to want to label what it is that you're presenting so that I know you know what each thing you're presenting is called. So first we're going to focus on the argument diagram for this one. So in your argument diagram, you do not present anything that's repeated, okay? You only present, a given premise or conclusion in its fullest, most exact form. So we're not going to have this in our diagram. This is the more precise version of this. So we're always going to start with premises in a diagram. This gets a little bit more complicated, but we're working with really simple arguments right now. So when it comes to the simplest of arguments, you'll always start with the premises at the top, and you'll first present the statement numbers. So the first premise is S3. So you're going to use S to mean statement, and then you'll do a 3. Then in parentheses, you'll do a capital P. So first this S for statement, the statement number in here, and then P for premise. Like I said, some students want to number the premises. So some people will have this as conclusion. They won't have any number, then they'll have P1, and then they'll have P2. But that's not what the notes tell you to do. We're numbering statements only in the paragraph. The numbers here are not for the premises, they're for the statements. Okay, so then what they'll sometimes do is they'll have the wrong numbers here, or they'll have this completely wrong because they didn't refer to the notes or follow them. So those are some warnings. If you want to add all that to your warnings, page 5, you can. So then S3, it turns out, is working together. So we're going to use a plus sign to mean together, jointly, with S4, another what? Premise. Okay. When we have two premises working jointly together, we're going to underline them like that. Then you should have a downward arrow directly under that plus sign. So if you have just two premises working together, you'll have one plus sign between them, and the arrow will go directly underneath the plus sign, directly underneath it. Then we will write the statement number for the conclusion, which is S1. So we'll put a C, capital C, in parentheses. All right, so this actually maps on directly to the definition for argument, but it also represents the logical structure of this, the logic of the reasoning in here. So this does not represent the order in which the statements actually occur. This represents the actual structure, whatever the order is, of statements of the premises and conclusion in here. So let's look at how this maps onto the definition for argument. So remember, an argument is comprised of a set of statements. So a set of statements would mean at least two statements. So that's what we have. With at least one premise. Do we have at least one premise? Yes, we happen to have two. That is given in support of. The arrow means in support of, which comes from the definition. Another statement, the conclusion, which also comes from the definition. All right, so now let's do an argument pattern. Okay, so the argument pattern does not include statement numbers, but it does follow the actual ordering or sequencing of the statements in the argument in paragraph form. So here we would do a conclusion is, and remember you learned about argument patterns in the module. You learned about three kinds. You had PC, which means at least one premise followed by conclusion. You had C-P, a conclusion followed by at least one premise. And then you had PCP, you have at least one premise followed by conclusion followed by at least one premise. So that's what we're doing right here. So the pattern in this one is a conclusion dash P. Okay, so I only use one P because P means at least one, and we use a dash here. All right, so to conclude this video, we're going to write down some rules about patterns and diagrams, and then we will just focus on applying everything that we have learned to the other arguments. Like I said, this is the longest video. So argument diagrams. Okay, so remember that you start with the premises. And here we're going to put simple arguments. Okay. Try to write very small and to save this half of the paper for other stuff when we talk about complex arguments. So start with premises, okay? And then you're going to give statement, S will mean statement from now on, number, statement number, and label, and then label in parentheses. Use the downward arrow to indicate in support of, okay, end with statement number and the label for the conclusion. So these right here, like I said, is argument diagram for simple arguments. Okay, so remember the plus sign between premises means they are working jointly together. Okay, so I hope you saved room over here because we might need it for a future lesson. All right, so that's argument diagrams. Those are the basics, okay? What you see here is what you see reflected here. So I should never see a downward arrow. I should never see an arrow going up, and I should never see you doing a diagram that has the conclusion first and then the premises. Okay, so now let's do, I'm gonna do, I guess you could say that this is in fourths. So I created fourths. So now I'm gonna talk about argument patterns. Or not talk about them, I already did in the soft talk module. Just gonna put some rules in place so that you can get extra credit. You can get anywhere between 4 and 6 points of extra credit on a graded assignment for argument analysis when you do patterns and diagrams. So argument diagrams use statement labels only. Use the dash between labels. Do not include repeated premises. That means premises, or let's put simple arguments here as well. Conclusions, okay. Do not use arrows, because remember the arrows for us in this class means in support of. If you have an argument where you first get a premise and then a conclusion, let's look at why this is important. Here you have a conclusion followed by a premise. Dash just means followed by. Arrow means in support of. If you use an arrow here, you're telling me a conclusion is being used in support of a premise, but in a simple argument, that is never the case. Okay, so let's see if we need to write anything else as we end our video. Use statement labels only. Use this between the labels. Do not, okay. The other thing is that P in a pattern equals at least 1. So, you might want to write this down as a warning. I'm not going to write it down, but you can pause the video and write it down if you want to. You don't have to. But take a look here. This had a conclusion followed by 2 premises. But we would not write down conclusion, premise, premise. That would be wrong. Okay? Why? Because P means at least 1 what? Premise. So even if there is more than 1 premise in an argument, a simple argument, after a conclusion, you'd still only have 1 P. And then we'll look at some variations on this lesson as we work through these examples. Okay, so we pretty much have 90% of the notes that we're going to be taking with respect to what is on here. We're pretty much just going to practice applying what we learned. Keep in mind, in the rest of the videos, keep in mind that I am going to ask you for 1 or all pages, and that whatever I write down here, whatever I do here, you need to do as well.